Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 305, Pantheism, Its Story and Significance. Link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. It's only 54 pages, although the initial text was over 100. Typical formatting for that particular era of time, as I've explained. Second and third links to my books blogs. This one definitely goes under the religion header. Pantheism is actually an interesting subject. Now, one of the main points, and this was, including in academic circles, generally held to be sacrosanct at the time, you have a sort of, you can't really call it evolution, but change over time through different stages of religion. Keep in mind that due to advances in archaeology and new finds and new explorations into linguistic systems, we now know that it's not a completely linear progression as they believed 100 years ago. But generally you have like archaic kind of primitive spiritualism. Then you have animism. And then it moves through polytheism, henotheism, which is basically polytheism with a caveat of not caring about the other gods, and or in the case of Judaism especially, which is a henotheistic religion, and Christians don't understand it's technically not a monotheism at all. In the initial sense, you have the belief that other deities exist, but they're demons. They're evil, and or you're just not supposed to worship them in some sense, for some moral reason. Then you have monotheism, and then you have pantheism. Now, pantheism roots in Spinoza. I won't say much about him specifically because his one major multi-volume set of ethics, I believe, was posthumous in nature. Unfortunately, he died fairly young, and he actually died here in the Netherlands. He lived in Amsterdam for a long time and died in Den Haag, which is also kind of interesting. And pantheism is a broad set of sort of intermingled beliefs, but the basic gist is the interpenetrating nature of deity and or not its absence, but its incorporation into everythingness. That is, and in pantheism, by the way, I'm apatheistic, and I don't believe or disbelieve in a deity or deities and or their form and function, because I've come to the conclusion that it's really impossible to have a structured debate on the topic. It's really impossible to say anything logical about it, because the very existence of an all-powerful being, especially if you believe in that sense of theism, would negate the principle of logic entirely. Well, if you're arguing outside of logic and philosophical rigor, there's no point in having that argument. I much prefer the academic studious side of the occult and folk magic and folklore and things of that nature. I think pantheism of all of those basic systems, in the more broad sense, makes the most sense. And even Christians, by the way, I'll posit this, although this is not part of the text. If you actually believe literally in the Christian Bible, you would have to be a pantheist, essentially. Let me explain. If you believe that God is literally everywhere, your Christian deity, it would have to interpenetrate. It wouldn't be able to be separate from any particular component of the creation that it had created because it interpenetrates. It would have to. In order to know everything, it would have to be part of everything too. In order to be all-powerful, it would have to at least be capable of being part of everything. It would need to interpenetrate literally all of existence. Without regards to time, space, matter and energy, anything like that, they're all just subjugate portions of it. Essentially, you'd be talking about a system almost, in one philosophical sense, vaguely similar to the Hindu concept of avatars or expressions. You have the divine totality. And this book specifically refutes the idea that that's purely pantheism, and I agree, it's not. But there's an aspect that's similar. The philosophical aspect of avatars or expressions of that one sort of deified whole, able to diverge itself into components to interact with its own creation, interpenetration after a fashion. It is simply expressing an aspect of itself and a power to do so by separating. And of course, if you have such a system within pantheism, you'd have to have an interpenetrating deity or a deified force. Obviously, I'm not the same as the cat that's next to me. That annoying motorcyclist outside is not the same as my microphone. They've diverged, but they are all still part of that sort of divine totality. And there are different sub-schools of pantheism that come after Spinoza. Basically, it's a modernistic religious idea. This work, half of it is dedicated to Spinoza, his lifetimes and memory, and the other half is pre-modern religious history, specifically geared towards refuting the idea of pure pantheism having pre-existed. So the Neoplatonists and all of these other groups, some of the philosophical statements they made being akin to elements of pantheism, potentially, but not forming that actual total philosophical viewpoint. And then it talks about some latter-day people. Giordano Bruno is mentioned, of course, burned at the stake as a heretic for his particular beliefs. You could stress pantheism or quasi-pantheism there. Very interesting work. It's extremely dense and very academic. This is from the religion series, and I think I must have edited a dozen different works within that series. There was Animism by Claude, actually, C-L-O-D-D, of course, and I think the Socrates one, I think, was one of those. Ancient Greek religion, I think there was an entry, ancient Egyptian, a bunch of different lecture series on these topics. They were basically meant as digests, so that's why they're on the shorter side. The idea was it was traveler's literature. You'd have a couple of these with you. You're on a wagon ride that takes 8 hours from one city to another city. You don't really have anything to do other than read. Read and drink. That's basically what they did. They'd have a picnic in the carriage, and they would read, and then they would discuss what they were reading. It was a social event. Travel used to be social instead of antisocial, believe it or not. But again, very good work if you're interested in Spinoza, if you're interested in pantheism as a philosophy, a religious philosophy. This is the foremost work that I myself have read from that period on the subject. It condenses it nicely so that it's much more easy to understand. And there is a little bit of the history of several of the figures involved with it as well. So again, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links to my books, blogs. Again, highly recommended for those into philosophy. That's about all. Peace out.